Hey, good morning. Good morning. Welcome to our next segment of Ask Janae. Today we are going to be going over travel expense deductions. This is kind of one of my more fun events to do because I don't know if you're like me. We always want to take advantage of any tax deductions we can get for traveling, and to answer some of those questions that you might have, because there are ways to take advantage of those tax travel or the travel expense deductions. So I'm going to go ahead and see. I had a little bit of technical difficulty. My assistant is not in the studio, so I'm not sure what happened. So anyway, I don't have Lars. Hopefully she'll pop in here soon, and she usually runs the chat. So if you have any questions, go ahead and drop those in there. I'll try and get to them as I see them, and like I said, hopefully she'll get back in. Also, we cover a lot of material in these events, so I just want to make sure that we will have copies of the slides available to you if you want to go ahead and request those slides. You can go ahead and request those, and it looks like my assistant is signing in now, so she'll probably go ahead and put those slides in the comment section so you can go ahead and get copies of those slides for future reference. And also remember that we go ahead and record these, obviously, so they're available on the various streaming sites afterwards if you want to go back and check it out again. Or if you have further questions, feel free to contact us here at Altera Business Solutions. We'd be happy to help you. And if you've got a moment, please make sure you like and subscribe to our various streamings platforms, at Altera Business Solutions on YouTube, and we have at Altera Tax Relief on Instagram, and Altera Business Solutions on Facebook. So if you like and follow us, we'd greatly appreciate it. And then you'll get invites, or you'll get notifications, or you'll find out when our next shows are going to be streaming, and what particular tax topics that you want to discuss, and how we can go ahead and get your questions answered. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and begin. It looks like Lars is having issues getting on, but anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So today, I started on the wrong slide. See, this is a little more challenging for me. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get this one started. Oh, there she is. Oh, good. Yeah, awesome. So she's going to go ahead. So today's presentation is travel expense deductions, and these are good for 2024. Anyway, I'm the CEO of Altera Business Solutions. I have a long accounting background in various in managerial accounting, manufacturing, and cost accounting heavy, and I do been preparing taxes for years, almost 20 years, and Altera Business Solutions has been around since 2020 or 2003. I'm sorry. So we've been around for a while. And anyway, there's a little bit about us. So let's go get into the topic, because like I said, this is one of my more favorite topics in taxation. So we're going to go over and discuss what are the different travel expenses, understanding what they are, the types of travel expenses, and different facts. We're going to discuss corporate travel policies, how to set one up, and also some rules about traveling as a digital nomad. If you wanted to go ahead and travel as a digital nomad, what are the particular rules, and what can you deduct, and so forth. So let's go ahead and dive in. Okay, so what are travel expenses? Well, travel expenses are expenses of costs associated with travel, obviously. Reasonable travel expenses are generally deducted from your tax return. Sorry, I'm having a little trouble speaking. And this is when, a company has an employee that's traveling and they want to go ahead and either reimburse that employee or deduct those travel expenses on their business return. Okay. Now, the key takeaways: travel expenses are tax deductible if they are incurred to conduct business activities. Only ordinary and necessary travel expenses are deductible. Okay, so nothing lavish or extravagant. The IRS considers employees to be traveling if their business obligations require them to be away from their tax home. And their tax home is where they live. Okay, so if they're have to be away from their tax, as long as it's less than a year, and we'll talk more about that. Examples of deductible travel expenses includes airfare, lodging, transportation services, meals and tips, and use of communication devices and equipment rentals. We'll get into a number of different things. And travel expenses are incurred while on indefinite work assignment, as long as it's less than 1 year. Otherwise, you're considered a resident of that wherever you are. Okay, so understanding travel expenses. The Internal Revenue Service considers employees to be traveling if their business obligations require them to be away from their tax home. And so this is their main place of stay. Okay, so it's typically, it's going to be a couple hours away, something that takes you, a while to get there. So you'll be able to deduct hotel expenses and so forth. Okay, so airfare, lodging, transportation services such as taxis, buses, trains, tips for those people as well. The cost of meals and tips for those meals, dry cleaning services or laundry services, and communications. If you need to go ahead and rent a computer or other communications devices, those would also be deductible. Okay, so understanding travel expenses. So the individual wage earners, they can no longer deduct on an unreimbursed business expenses. And that was eliminated in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. Now, those are set to expire on 2025 or year 2025. And so depending on how the election goes, will determine whether or not these tax rules change, and Congress votes on different tax laws and the president signs them in. So while many travel expenses can be deducted by businesses, those deemed unreasonable or lavish or extravagant or expenditures for personal purchases or purposes are excluded. So you don't get to deduct those. Okay, so types of travel expenses and facts. All right. The use of a personal vehicle in conjunction with business trip, including actual miles, tolls, parking, and fees, can be included as a travel expense. The cost of renting a vehicle can also be counted as travel expense. Okay. Though the business use portion of the trip, so you can use it for personal as well if you want to go ahead, but you want to make sure that you track the separate miles, what is personal and what are business miles. Okay, travel expenses incurred while on an indefinite work assignment that lasts more than a year are also not deductible. The IRS allows the other types of ordinary and necessary expenses to be treated as related to business travel for deduction purposes. And that includes, again, your business meal, the hiring of a public stenographer, payment of computer rental fees on the trip, for shipping, if you need to ship luggage or ship display materials to you, that is also deductible for your business presentation. Travel expenses can also include operating and maintaining a house trailer as part of your business trip. So if you have a trailer, you want to go ahead and take it out on the road and take your time getting to your business meetings, you can deduct that as a business travel expense as long as you've exited your tax home. Okay, can I deduct my business travel expenses? So again, do I need receipts for travel expenses. Even if you're an individual, if you're being reimbursed by your employer, you're going to want to keep those receipts. If you're the employer, then you want to keep the receipts, and just in case you're audited. And travel expenses are one of the more audited items, only because some people can take advantage of certain travel, although it's not really a qualified travel expense. And there are penalties for that as well. So trying to keep the people honest. All right. What are reasonable travel expenses? Reasonable travel expenses from the viewpoint of an employer or the IRS would include transportation to and from the business destination, accommodation costs, and meal costs. Certainly, business supplies and equipment necessary to do the job away from home are reasonable. Taxis, Ubers taken during business trips are also reasonable. Unreasonable is a judgment call, right? The boss of the IRS may have different opinion in what's reasonable, whether or not you have a hotel suite versus just a standard room, or if you want to drive the premium car, sports car, and rental instead of just getting a standard sedan. So you got like they may have differences of opinion, and usually the IRS agents will win when it comes to those types of things, unless they're reasonable. And again, okay, so the bottom line, individual taxpayers need no longer fret over record keeping because they don't get to get unreimbursed travel expenses deducted on their tax returns. Okay, if you're self-employed or you own a business, then you want to make sure you keep your records, and so you can go ahead and account for those business travel expenses properly. Okay, so if you happen to be a corporation or a separate entity, then you're going to want to set up a corporate travel policy. And the reason for this is similar to an accountable plan, which we had another live stream about accountable plans, but this is basically a travel accountable plan for your employees. And it allows a number of different things. It allows you to monitor and keep control over your employees and how they travel. But also, as I mentioned, the ability to not deduct unreimbursed travel expenses and to your employees or on their tax returns. So since you can't deduct those personally, we want to make sure that we at least get reimbursed by the employer. And if it's a reimbursement, we also want to make sure that it's not included as taxable income. And the only way we can do that is by maintaining receipts and proving that it's a reimbursement. Now, a little tax tip is if businesses, if you're self-employed, you get a 50% meal deduction, basically, for your business meals. However, if you are reimbursed through a reimbursement plan, then you can actually deduct 100%. So reimbursing that employee. So that's just a little tidbit to keep in mind if you're one of those self-employed individuals. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about a corporate travel policy. It is essential. It's actually, it really is essential because you want to make sure that your employees, that if they're reimbursed, they're not going to get taxed on it. And you're going to want to make sure that you have some sort of control over your travel policy. So let's talk about the best practices of having a travel policy. Okay, we monitor employee travel expenses to ensure accuracy and detect possible instances of fraud. It could be tempting, I suppose. Okay, establish guidelines for which hotels, airlines, and other travel organizations that employees may book through. So this gives you a little bit of controls. I mean, maybe you have certain hotels that you want to make sure that your employee stays at versus, Motel 6 versus the Hilton or whatever. It was whatever you seem reasonable for that employee. So you want to make sure that that's set up in your corporate policy. I mean, whether or not they choose to stay somewhere else, they probably could do that, but pay the difference. But again, that should be stated in the corporate policy. Okay. Ensure that employees understand which travel expenses may be submitted for reimbursements. Okay, so basically, as you know, through travel expense, you need to go ahead and document and make sure that they're truly a travel expense, and they're a qualified travel expense with the IRS. So basically, we need to let the employees know in this contract what travel expense deductions they can take. Okay. Remain compliant with the Internal Revenue Service, tax rules, and regulations regarding business travel. We don't want to get them upset with us, but we also want to be able to take them, and we want to make sure that we cover our you-know-whats by retaining all of our receipts and documenting everything that needs to be documented. Okay. On the employee's side, having a standard corporate policy in place help employees avoid the scenario that they may be waiting weeks or months to be reimbursed for that. So, I mean, which is not even really somewhat relevant now, that since they can't really even deduct it on their taxes. But you do want to set some kind of limitations that they need to have their receipts in early enough that they can be reimbursed within a reasonable amount of time, and that's both good for good strategy. Okay, I think. All right, generally speaking, a corporate travel policy should cover rules and guidelines of the following: airport, hotel, rental car reservations, where they're supposed to go get those and where they're supposed to stay, other transportation expenses, whether or not they're traveling by train or ride sharing, employee spending as it pertains to meals and entertainment, phone calls necessary, parking fees and tolls, acceptance of gifts when meeting with clients or expensing the gifts presented to the clients, medical care or travel insurance, currency exchange fees, international banking, employee submission of receipts for reimbursement, review and approval, and payment of submitted expenses, personal safety of employees, and security of business equipment or documents. Okay, when in doubt, it's better for a corporate travel policy to cover more ground than it really needs to, just to make sure, like we always want to cover our you-know-whats. So more is better in this case. Right. Creating a corporate travel, identify our objectives, and we're going to run through these as get our team involved, because we need to go ahead and make sure that they understand their corporate travel policy. Okay, and some of these are, say, do you have any employees who require special accommodations for travel related to a health condition or disability? Are there certain destinations that the business travels to regularly? Are there any preferred hotels and airlines? Is there a preferred process for booking trips and answering questions? Who will be responsible for approving the booking and answering employee questions? And if employees are using corporate credit cards, what are the rules expected to follow? And how will you submit those expenses for reimbursement? So lots of stuff, right? And let's go into the draft of policy, review it carefully. Once you get the feedback and you think you need, and you're working on your corporate travel policy, make sure you put it in a draft, and you can you may want to review your travel policy a few times to make sure you're covering all the most important bases. Once you have the language down, you can review it one final time to check for spelling and grammatical errors. Okay, it's just important because it is going to be considered a business or corporate document. So, and it's going to be published, and it's going to be sent to the employees to follow. So you want to go ahead and share the policy with the staff. And implementing the corporate travel policy. Again, you want to make sure that you train your employees on what the policy is. What is this particular time frame that they have for submitting expenses and being reimbursed? Ensure that new hires get a copy of the travel policy, and regularly review and update your policy to make sure that it remains current, and conduct monthly reviews and audits of travel expenditures to make sure that your employees are staying in compliance. And you want to make sure they're staying in compliance or not abusing those deductions or reimbursement. Okay, so all right. So ensuring compliance with corporate travel policy. We want to maintain this compliance across all stakeholders, and all stakeholders So we want to update our policy regularly, simplify the policy if necessary to avoid confusion, clearly communicate, all the basis where we want to go ahead and train and make sure that our employees understand our corporate travel policy. All right. So sample corporate policy. And corporate travel policies are common across all industries. Okay, so they give you an example on the left-hand side of different corporate travel policies. They include JP Morgan Chase, Best Buy, Columbia University, U.S. Department of Interior, Starbucks. So what is corporate travel policy and why is it important? We've discussed that. Pretty much we know that we want to be able to have control over the expenditures, and we also want to make sure that they're not being abused, as well as not creating a taxable event for reimbursing our employees. What should be included? A minimum corporate travel policy, outline approved practices for booking airfare, rental cars, and so forth. And how can organizations create a corporate? First step is creating one. Review it a few times, talk with your staff, find out. Bottom line, the corporate travel policy may be necessary if your employees take regular business trips to meet with clients or prospective clients, attend professional conferences, seminars, or participate in career training. If you don't have a policy in place, you may want to set that as a priority for your business. Having a clear policy leaves little room for misunderstanding or mismanagement of your travel privileges. And that goes for protection of the employer as well as the employee. So it's very important, like I said, just like having one of those accountable plans in place. Okay, so everything you need to know about a business travel deduction. What counts as business travel? Well, this is where we get into the little grayer area. The IRS has a few simple guidelines for determining what counts as a business travel, okay? It needs to be mostly business. It needs to be ordinary and necessary, and it has to be someplace away from your tax home. So, what counts as mostly business? So, the IRS measure your time away in days. So, if you spend more days doing business activities than not, your trip is considered mostly business. Your travel days are counted as work days. Special rules for traveling abroad. If you're traveling abroad for business purposes, your trip counts entirely for business, as long as you spend less than 25% of your time doing personal activities like vacationing. Okay. So let's say you head off for Zurich for 9 days. You've got a 7-day run of conference talks, client meetings, and travel takes to get there. And you then tack on 2 days skiing on the nearby slopes. Good news, your trip still counts as entirety for business. That's because you took 2 of the 9 days, which is less than 25%. So that's pretty cool. Okay, what is an ordinary and necessary expense? Okay, makes sense given your industry was taken for the purpose of carrying out business activities. If you have a choice between 2 conferences, one is in your hometown and one is in London, the British one wouldn't be an ordinary and necessary expense because you could obviously go to the one that's closer. What is your tax home? Basically, that's where you live, or your tax base if you happen to be traveling. A taxpayer can deduct travel expenses anytime you are traveling away from home. But depending on where you work, the IRS definition of home can get complicated. So your tax home is often, but not always, where you live with your family. So what the IRS calls your family home. When it comes to defining it, there are 2 factors to consider. What's your main place of business, and how large is your tax home? And the reason we're going to discuss this is because this is how we get into discussing digital nomads. Okay, if your main place of business is somewhere other than your family home, your tax home will be the former, where you work, not where your family lives. For example, live with your family in Chicago, but you work in Milwaukee during the week, where you stay in a hotel and eat in restaurants. Okay. So basically, your tax home then would be in Milwaukee because that's where you work and that's where you reside, where you are working. So Any travel away from that tax home then is deductible. In most cases, your tax home is the entire city or the general area where your main place of business is located. The entire city is easy to define, but it's the general area, so it can get a little bit trickier. So especially if you're in a major metropolitan area, and whether or not they include the whole metropolitan area or certain sections of the metropolitan area. Okay. Okay, so rules for business travel. Your trip should take you away from your home base. Okay. So a good rule of thumb is 100 miles. That's about 2-hour drive or any kind of plane ride to be able to claim all the possible travel deductions. Your trip should require you to sleep somewhere that isn't your home. Okay, so with that in mind, I know I mentioned in our little commercial, about commuting back and forth to work, even though you're like traveling 50 miles. That is not considered travel expenses. It's not deductible for commuting purposes. You actually have to be somewhere far enough away from home that you sleep there, or you must sleep there, or so forth. Okay. You should be working regular hours. So as you're traveling, as he said, traveling days count as work days, but you should be working your regular hours, which would be, if you work 8 to 5, those would be considered your work days. But so it's fine to take personal time in the evening, and you can still take weekends off, but you can't take a half hour call from Disneyland and call it a business trip. Here's an example. Let's say you're a real estate agent living in Chicago. You travel to an industry conference in Las Vegas. You go to the conference during the day, go out in the evenings, and then stay the weekend. That's a business trip. Okay. And the trip should last less than a year. As we mentioned, once you've been somewhere for over a year, you're essentially living there. However, traveling from 6 months at a time is fine. For example, you're a freelancer or Upwork living in Seattle. You go down to stay with your sister in San Diego for the winter and expand your client network, and you work regular hours while you're there. That counts as a business trip. Okay, so let's talk about digital nomads. Ooh, I think I moved my little screen over. Okay, so requirement. Okay, so it's a little bit different because digital nomads are typically out of the country. So that would, it changes the rules a little bit. Okay, so digital nomads have to be able to claim a particular foreign city as a tax home. Okay, so this is the way that you can deduct travel expenses as a digital nomad. So if they want to write off any travel expenses, you don't have to be there all the time, but it should be your professional home base when you're abroad. Okay, for example, if you rent a room or a studio in Prague for the year, you regularly call clients and finish projects from there. You still travel a lot for both work and play, but Prague is your tax home. So you can deduct travel expenses for your travel away from Prague. Okay. And some work-related reason for traveling. As long as you've got a tax home and some work-related reason for traveling, these excursions count as business trips. Plausible reasons including meeting with local clients or attending a local conference and then extending your stay. However, if you're a freelance software developer working from Thailand because you like the weather better, well, that unfortunately, that is not a business travel expense. Okay. So the travel expenses you can write off. As a rule of thumb, all travel-related expenses on a business trip are tax deductible. You can also claim meals while traveling, but be careful with the entertainment expenses like going out for drinks. Or going to ball games or certain entertainment. Those are considered entertainment. Those are no longer deductible. Okay, so and they don't consider, like, if you're going out for drinks, that's entertainment too. So be careful there. Okay, so all transportation is deductible. That is all transportation. Just remember, a client is comping your airfare fare, or if you booked your ticket with a frequent flyer, then it isn't deductible since your cost was zero. Okay, so I mean, so if someone's paying for you, you don't get to deduct it. You have to pay it, or your business, your business needs to pay it. Okay, so that you can deduct it. So if you rent a car to go to business trip, the rental is tax deductible. If you drive your own vehicle, you can either take actual cost or you can use standard mileage deductions, just like the auto expense deductions. We did a live stream on that a week or so ago. If you need to know more about the standard mileage deduction or mileage. Okay, lodging, hotels, motels, Airbnb, sublets, and Craigslist, even reimbursing a friend for crashing on their couch. All of these are considered tax deductible lodging expenses. I've even had clients deduct their timeshares because they took on clients there and they ended up working 5 of the 7 days and they were able to deduct their business portion of the timeshare. So that's awesome. Okay, meals while traveling. If your trip has you staying overnight or even crashing somewhere for a few hours, you can head back. You can write off food expenses. Grabbing a burger alone or coffee at the airport, that is also counts. Even groceries and takeout are tax deductible. One thing that you need to keep in mind, you can usually deduct 50% of the cost. And actually, that's not so anymore. These years are a little outdated, so it's actually 50% now. But like I said, if you happen to have a corporate travel policy, and you go ahead and reimburse yourself for meals, you do get to deduct 100% of the meals that way. So Wi-Fi and communication. So you need Wi-Fi at the hotel. It's extra Wi-Fi, or you need to communicate with your employer or your clients or so forth. Those are all allowable deductible expenses. And shipping. Sometimes you forget something or it hasn't come in yet and you need to have it shipped, or you need to go ahead and ship something out. I mean, I have a number of different events that we've gone to that, or conventions that you have to have materials shipped. All those are deductible as travel expenses. Dry cleaning. So dry cleaning while you're traveling is tax deductible. Okay. Or laundry charges. So anyway, whether or not you put the quarters in the machine at the hotel or you go ahead and order laundry service, but make sure you check your corporate policy if your employer will reimburse for that, but they can deduct it. So, all right. And travel expenses you cannot deduct. Okay, so here's basically the rules. It's not so much, but it's whether or not it's personal. Okay, and like I mentioned, you can't deduct non-reimbursed expenses on your personal return. Not currently, but you can only deduct travel expenses. Okay, so what's all? If you bring a child or spouse on a business travel, if you bring them on your business trip, your travel expense deductions get a little bit trickier. In general, the cost of bringing other people on a business trip is considered personal expense, which means it's not deductible. You can only deduct travel expenses if your child or spouse. This is important for a number of self-employed people because I see them try to do this and it's not, can't really do that. Okay, so you can only deduct travel expense if your child or spouse is an employee, has a bona fide business purpose for traveling with you, would otherwise be allowed to deduct the travel expense on their own. Okay. So staying in a hotel may be required for travel expenses. That's why room charge and taxes are deductible. Some additional charges that are not tax deductible are gym and fitness centers. Don't ask me why, but movie rental fees, game rental fees, they would not, even though you buy them from the hotel. And again, that should probably be stated on your corporate travel policy. Okay. Where to claim travel expenses when you're filing your taxes? Well, if you're self-employed, that's going to be on your Schedule C. If you are a self-employed individual or sole proprietorship. What happens if your business deductions are disallowed? Well, if they're disallowed, they're disallowed. That means you're going to have to pay them back or not take the deduction. So deduction was legitimate, but you don't have documentation to support it. Okay, so what happens in that case? Well, you don't get to take it. Unfortunately, that's why it's so important that you keep those receipts. Okay. When does a penalty come into play? Well, there's a 20% penalty. It's not automatically applied. It only applies if it is allowed you to pay substantially less. Okay, so basically it's kind of abusive travel expense deductions of a business, like trying to include their families and so forth on their travel expenses and just, blowing up their travel expense deductions with non-qualified deductions. So the penalty is 20%. Okay, the penalty is normally 20% of the difference between what you should have paid and what you actually paid. So that's a significant penalty. Okay, so wow, that's a lot of material. Glad you guys hung in there, and hope. Anyway, we appreciate you sticking with us. Also, if you again wouldn't mind following us and subscribing to our different social media platforms, we'd greatly appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you in a number of different shows coming up in September. We got a good lineup, and we're going to go over tax tips for musicians. We've got Linda Berg-Herring, a private investigator, joining us on our entrepreneurship series. And we have How Do You Know When You Need a Tax Professional? Coming up, a number of different programs. And so you want to make sure you subscribe or join our newsletter so we can update you with those coming shows. And also you can go back and rewatch them. I know they're so exciting, and I know you really want to go back and watch them. But anyway, we appreciate you. I hope these help you guys, and we'll see you at the next one. Bye-bye.